Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reiterate some key points around social media for the high-tech crime model. So we had a lecture where I tried to introduce some general characteristics of social media and also some of a range of problems around social media. Okay, and the lecture notes, the PowerPoint's available now if you want to look at it. So one of the things that we were saying was to think about how social media is it's the current popular focus of the wider issue or the wider topic area of computer-mediated communication. So where we're using technology to somehow to enable that communication, then that is defined as computer-mediated communication. And a very good example of that was email. So we looked at some examples from when email was the dominant form of CMC, computer-mediated communication. But we did recognise that increasingly people are now communicating via social media. And so what we need to have is a working definition of social media, and that was something that we discussed in the lecture. So if you're going to write about social media, then make sure you've got a working definition of it. And we see two terms that are very popular in popular use. One is social media, and the other is social networking sites, SNS. Okay, and you can just find a definition that helps clarify what these are. One of the points I made in the lecture was that there's a big kind of blurring of the lines, a big crossover between what we might count as social media and what we might count as social networking sites. So a social networking site you might think as being something like Facebook. That's the classic dominant social networking site. It's about social networking. Very straightforward. But of course Facebook has developed many other features and facilities. So it now offers kind of live video streaming, it also offers direct secure messaging, private messaging, and then we can look at other things such as YouTube, for example, where primarily it's about uploading video clips, but people can also post comments on those clips. People can take those clips and embed them. And that's got echoes of Instagram, it's got echoes of Facebook, and Twitter also does similar things. So Twitter, primarily we're posting comments up or we're retweeting comments, but we can also direct message people if they're following us. We can also embed images and video clips. So the thing with a lot of these platforms is that they have lots of characteristics, some of which will duplicate the characteristics of other platforms. Okay, so you shouldn't get too hung up on that. The key thing is it's kind of like we know it when we see it, a bit like what's good art. We know it when we see it. So we can probably find some extreme examples that are difficult to define, but by and large, social media, social networking sites, we're thinking Facebook, we're thinking Twitter, we're thinking YouTube, we're thinking Google+. We're perhaps also thinking about WhatsApp, Snapchat, and so on. Okay. Now, a good question to ask ourselves is, why do we use them? Right? And we use them because we get something out of using them. Economists talk about the idea about gaining net benefits from something. So there might be a little cost to using it, and the cost might just be your time, because many of these services are free at the point of use. Although we did make the point in the lecture that if something's free, okay, and there's no obvious product, then what's the product? And the product might be you and your privacy, okay? Your data is very valuable to advertisers who will pay for that information. And we'll examine that in more detail in a different session. So there's a cost to this kind of cost of your privacy, certainly a cost of time, okay? So with time comes what's called an opportunity cost. So if you're spending lots of time on things like Twitter and Facebook and stuff, then you're not spending time doing other stuff. Maybe watching your favourite television, learning to play the guitar, spending time down the pub with your friends. Whatever it happens to be, but that's what is an opportunity cost. So what do we get out of it? Well, again, it's fairly straightforward. Some of this stuff, what we get out of it is we get out of it being able to communicate with our family and our friends. We get out of it the satisfaction of posting up comments, of reacting to things. We get out of it the kind of the beauty and the joy and the fun and the aesthetics of the images and the video clips that are shared. So it doesn't have to be something very sophisticated to say that we're actually getting something out of it. Okay, so there's a net benefit to it. There's a net benefit. We're getting something out of it. There's an advantage to us of using this stuff, which is why we're using it. And especially in terms of the social networking aspect, the networking aspects, then the more us and the more of our friends that use these sites, then the more advantage there is to it, okay? So we thought about Metcalfe's law, and we thought about the nodes on a system and how the value of the system goes up with the nodes. And we could translate that into kind of social nodes rather than just physical nodes. Again, look at the PowerPoint, see what I mean. But essentially, the more people that are on, especially the more your friends that are on, or your family that are on, that you want to communicate with, of course, then the more value it has to you. But the potential downside to these sites, of course, is how might they be exploited by people for criminal or otherwise just generally socially negative purposes. Okay, so the sites themselves are very keen to enable communication, but the platforms tend to be fairly neutral, fairly neutral in terms of what that information actually is. Okay. So they encourage communication, they make it really easy to send messages, they make it really easy to upload images, to post video clips, whatever. What they're less concerned about is the actual content of the images, the intention and the meaning of the images and the messages. Okay? So sharing is inherently good, they make sharing really easy. But of course we know then that people can then exploit that. So I can post up very negative messages about somebody. I can communicate in a very negative way about somebody. I can also reach out to people who are potential victims. Okay? Because again, what the technology does, it potentially puts me in contact with lots of people that otherwise I wouldn't normally have any contact with at all. And we'll see some instances where we're looking at specific examples of services where clearly the offender and the victim, potential victim or actual victim, have been brought together by the technology, okay? And again, the technology means that we could have people who are interacting socially who've never met at all in the physical space, in the physical world, and indeed it might be that they're literally in different countries, different continents, okay? So we've got people who are hundreds or thousands of miles apart, but they can interact thanks to the technology. And they can interact in a positive way or of course negative way. So if you're thinking in terms of some useful food to look at, we think about terms of routine activity theory. Then we think about, well, have we got a motivated offender? Well, yes, out there somewhere potentially. Have we got a potential victim? And is there an absence of a capable guardian? And a capable guardian, as I was saying in the lecture, might be an individual, it might be a person, such as a teacher, a parent, or a police officer, okay? Or the capable guardian might be a system, it might be something that we built into the systems. So, when we bear this in mind, we can think about what kind of problems do we encounter with social media. So again, we can use the phrase sometimes to think about social media, but then you throw in the phrase anti-social media to recognise antisocial behaviour. And behaviour might be just antisocial or negative, or it might be actually legally criminal behaviour. And again, we'll look at some specific examples of this kind of thing. And of course, what we flagged up is some types of behaviour. We may think it's antisocial behaviour, it's very negative behaviour, but it's not actually illegal, or it's not illegal in certain countries when that behaviour is initially initiated. But then we recognise that it's such a problem that eventually we actually bring in regulations and we make it illegal. So one of the examples I gave, and we'll come back and look at this in a different session, is I talked about revenge porn, for example. And revenge porn, the actual posting of kind of intimate images of someone designed to embarrass them. There was no specific legislation against that, right? But the term revenge porn, which is widely used now, recognises this as an issue. It clearly became an issue. Some websites made lots of money out of it. Other individuals used it just simply as a way of punishing people that they'd now fallen out with, that they no longer had relationships with. And so new laws have been brought in quite a few of the American states, and for example in England and Wales, that recognises that act where you're deliberately posting up images that people may have consented to at the time, but the idea was that they weren't consenting to them being publicly distributed later on, and that you're doing it to embarrass them, you're doing it to shame them, etc., etc. It's now recognised as specific legislation. Okay, so that's one example of that, and we'll see other examples of other things. So what you need to think about when we're looking at how high-tech crime and the criminology and the kind of social media all comes together is the fact that as we spend more and more of our time online and we spend more time interacting via social media, then where we have people, okay, then a subset of that population, okay, are potential motivated offenders, and a subset of that population are our potential victims, okay? So that brings together potential victims and potential offenders. So it's no great surprise that we're seeing an ever-increasing level of criminality that's linked to technology in some ways, because in wider society we're spending more time interacting with the technology, and where we have people, then we have the potential for crime and criminality, of course. Okay? So that's going to be one of the kind of themes that we keep running with. So as we migrate and spend more of our time socially, or more of our economic activities are facilitated by the technology, then the opportunities for different types of crime can come along. And it might be that the crime is kind of, a kind of an individual level, so it might be one person harassing another person, and we'll look at examples of cyber harassment, cyber stalking and so on. It could be where we're looking at instances of fraud, or there's issues around revenge porn, or there's issues around sexting, and again it's an interesting problem for us to look at. So we'll develop these and we'll look at some specific examples of this term where we specifically look at issues around that kind of thing, along with things like hacking and various other issues, okay, and we've outlined all of those now on now for you, so you've got a sense of what's coming up. And then you can bear in mind, of course, what are the unique characteristics of the technology. So we know that the technology enables this global reach. We know that the technology crosses lots of traditional legal jurisdictional boundaries, even where the perpetrator and the victim are perhaps living in the same country. Okay, so you might have two people in England that are involved in some kind of criminal issue. One is the perpetrator, one is the victim. Then if they're using technology, then it could go through American servers, it could go through servers that are located elsewhere in the world. So suddenly there are lots of cross-jurisdictional issues that come into play. So this is always a complicating factor. Another complicating factor is the demographic of people who are using the technology is skewed towards the younger end of the population. So again, we've got a lot of people who are legal minors in various countries, and the legal minors, they may be victims, or again, they may be perpetrators. So especially when it comes to things like copyright issues, intellectual property crime, or where it comes to perhaps issues around sexting or the distribution and viewing of pornography and illicit images, etc., or hacking into systems. How do the legal systems deal with that when the perpetrators and or the victims are legal minors? So again, it's another complicated issue that the police, the criminal justice systems, and policymakers and politicians generally have to deal with. Okay, so hopefully you've got a general sense of that from the lecture that we did as an introduction to high-tech crime and social media, and it's something that we'll develop in the seminar, and that we'll keep developing throughout the term, and we'll come back to from very specific examples and perspectives. Okay.